welcome to week 6, our last week of our message series called This Is Us, about who we are striving to be as the Connection Faith community and those core values that come out of our mission statement to connect people with God, with each other, and with the world around us. We do each one of those things in 2 ways, so if you can't remember them, let me catch you up. We started 6 weeks ago with Pastor Katie talking about how we connect with each other when we dive more deeply into discipleship and trying to be more Christ-like. And then we also talked about how we build relationships when we're just having some fun together through fellowship. Then we started talking about our connection to God and how we do that through what we call worship. And we can connect with each other in a group, in a public setting when we gather together for worship, say on Sunday mornings, but then also how we connect to God and encounter His presence in the other 167 hours in a week through silence and solitude, through prayer and Scripture. Then last week, Pastor Kyle kicked us off talking about our third element of our mission statement, connecting with the world around us. And he talked about engagement. Now, a lot of churches use words here like mission or outreach or service. And I like those words, but they often have a connotation of doing something for someone else. And whereas it's good to help others, we use the word engagement because we want to do more than just do things for people. We want to see their value as human beings and their value as children of God. And so we want to be with them, not just do things for them. So I hope you had the opportunity this past week to engage people in the world around you. Maybe not just doing things for them, but learning their stories and connecting with them in a different, deeper way. Well, we're going to talk about our last element of connecting with the world around us, and that today is sharing our stories. Now, a lot of churches use a word here that kind of leaves a bad taste in some people's mouths, and I want to bring it up, and I want to let you discuss it for a second. It's a word called evangelism. Now, it's gotten a bad rap in our world because a lot of times that word evangelism has bad connections to it in most people's minds. Maybe you have a good connection, but that's the first thing I want you to discuss. If you're in a group, pause the video. If you're by yourself, go ahead and pause it too. I want you to think about this question. When I say the word evangelism, what comes to mind? Maybe you've got a story or an experience or a picture in your head. I want you to share that. When I say evangelism, what pops into your head? Ready, go. Now, I can only imagine the conversations that came up, televangelists on TV with big teeth and $54 million jets or whatever. I'm sure those were some of the stories that popped into your head when you hear the word evangelism. For me, when I hear that word, I think of a guy named Brother Dan, who was a street preacher when I was in college. He would stand on the quad at the University of Illinois, and he would point his finger at the students going by, and he'd say, "You're all going to hell because you're fornicators." And then I'm sure they had to go look up what that word meant. But I just couldn't imagine anyone walking by Brother Dan, having him point his finger at them, telling them they're going to hell, and having anyone go, "Hey, that's a club I want to be a part of." He was a sideshow. People stopped to watch because it was entertainment. And I know he thought he was doing good, but I'm sure it pushed people further away. That's not what we mean by evangelism. So how do we share our faith story? How do we approach other people and share the amazing things that God has done in our life? Jesus calls us to go and make disciples. Well, how do we do that without being a televangelist or Brother Dan? Well, Pastor Kyle told us a story last week about Jesus encountering a woman from Samaria at a well. And Jesus sits down with her and he tells her his story. He says, "I am the Messiah." And then he tells some things about her that only the Messiah could know, and it changes her life. He tends to her physical need first, but then he goes beyond that to share his story and attend to her spiritual need as well. So an encounter with someone else changed her life. Now, in my own life, I've had plenty of encounters with other people who are pivotal on my faith journey. And I'm sure there's someone in your life who you can point to as well. So that's the next question I want you to explore. I want you to pause the video if you're in a group, talk about it, or by yourself. Just think about who has had the most impact on you when it comes to your faith journey, when it comes to your spiritual life, who took the time out to invest in you like Jesus did with the woman at the well. And then share that with the group or ponder that as you're thinking about it by yourself. Take a minute and answer that question. So we have those people that invest in us and it changes our lives, just as Jesus invested in the woman at the well and it changed her life. But I don't tell that story again just to reiterate it. I tell it again because that's not where the story ends. What happened next is powerful. If you remember, it comes from John's version of Jesus' life, the 4th chapter. I'm going to read what happens next, verses 28 through 30. It says this. It says, the woman left her water jar beside the well and ran back to the village telling everyone, come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah? And so the people came streaming from the village to see him. See, that's evangelism. She has an encounter with Jesus Christ. It changes her life. And then what does she do? She runs back to the village, leaves her water jar, and tells everyone her story. That's what we mean when we say evangelism, sharing our stories. I can only imagine if Brother Dan had stood out on a quad and told what Jesus had done to change his life rather than pointing fingers. That's the most powerful tool we have when it comes to sharing our faith, is telling our personal stories. I want to share a little bit of mine with you. The person who made such an impact on my life was a pastor who showed up at the church my family and I attended when I was 12 years old. It's a tough time in my life, but she showed up in March and said, this summer we're taking the youth on a mission trip. And sure enough, in 3 months, we raised enough money to send 15 of us to the Appalachian Mountains. It began a love in me for working with others and introducing people to the love of Jesus Christ through service and ministry and outreach, but also engagement, like I talked about, being with them. And it began to melt the ice around my heart for ministry and for a relationship with Jesus Christ. And it also opened the door for Julia every so often to go, Mike, have you ever thought about being a pastor? And I would say no. And then she would ask again a little while later, and I would say maybe. And then she'd ask a little while later, and I'd say, well, I'm thinking about it. And I was like, how did that happen? Well, the ice was melting around my heart. Sure enough, then a few years later, on one of those mission trips to Monterrey, Mexico, I said, God, I feel this nudging on my heart to be a pastor. If you want me to do that, give me a sign and make it big because I don't want to miss it. And sure enough, in this church in downtown Monterrey, Mexico, of all places, I felt an unmistakable call on my life to be a pastor. And so it began this run for me of following this path, of wanting to introduce people to the love of Jesus Christ. And as long as I have breath, for as many years as I'm on this earth, that'll be my mission, to show as many people as I possibly can how much God loves them. That's a little bit of my story, but you've also heard from Pastor Katie and Pastor Kyle over the course of this message series. I want you to hear their stories as well.
Hey there, so I'm going to try to tell you my story pretty quickly tonight, but I have a lot more to share, so feel free to ask me questions anytime. From a very young age, I was nurtured, taught, and cared for by a local United Methodist church in Edwardsville called St. John's. I got to join the church youth group in middle school, and that's where I really felt for the first time the presence of God. And that's where I began a spiritual journey of questioning my faith, breaking promises with God, but also experiencing Christ's unconditional love and forgiveness. I had a lot of adult mentors, including my parents, and they welcomed my questions and they encouraged me on my faith journey. And at age 16, I got to go on this retreat where I first felt the call to be a pastor. And it was so cool, I got to share that with all of my friends, and even my parents were there. But I fell away from this call and also kind of my faith for a few years. And eventually I came back around when I was 20, and I was working as a psychology intern for the summer. I also got to be a youth chaperone at camp and also go on a mission trip that summer. And I really just felt that God was leading me in a different direction than psychology. God was saying, come back into ministry. So I finished up my psychology degree and began seminary the next year. I was 21 and I was completely naive, but I knew that that was where God was calling me to be. And in seminary, one of the questions that they ask you and they want you to answer is, what area of ministry are you being called to? Well, I had no clue. I didn't know for sure. But early on in that first semester, I was asked if I wanted to pursue a dual degree program. So Eden Seminary and WashU, they do this program where you can get a Master's of Pastoral Studies and a Master's of Social Work in 3 years. And it sounded good to me, so I enrolled. And it finally felt right to merge the spiritual with the secular as I was challenged to consider topics of social justice, pastoral care and counseling, and also ethics. Well, also in my second year of graduate school, I got hired at my home church at St. John's to be their youth minister. And more than anything in my life to that point, being a pastor to preteens and teenagers was spiritually transformational and also really difficult. But through that job, I learned so much about my own connection to Christ, my view of the church universal, and about how God's presence is in and around the whole entire world. I met some incredible people who will be lifelong friends, and I've had the privilege of being a mentor to hundreds of teens throughout the years. It was because of this experience as a youth pastor that I took the calling even further, and I became an ordained Methodist pastor. Well, as many of you already know, I finished my ministry at St. John's a little over a year ago. An unfortunate circumstance occurred, and those same people who had nurtured and cared and loved me as a child and then took a shot on hiring me as a young adult, they turned their backs on me and my family and also several of the other staff. It was hurtful, painful, and I may never get over the grief that I have felt. But just like the waiting that we experience during the season of Lent, I was in a season of waiting, and resurrection came. God was still very present in my life, and God met me in my suffering and in my sorrow. And God called me to a new path of ministry as a hospital chaplain, where I get the honor and the privilege to meet people who are also experiencing grief and sorrow. And as I look back, God was really steering me towards this route, even in my undergraduate degree, and then especially in my graduate degree. The merging of social work and pastoral ministry is evident every day in my work as a chaplain. The heartbreaks and the discouragement that I have felt over the years, they've made me stronger and more present for people who also have heartbreak and discouragement. I see my own humanity in Christ on the cross, rejected, hurt. But God did not leave him there. God overcame death and brought life from the dust. And it's in this where I can find ultimate hope and joy in my faith. And that's my story. I'd love to hear yours.
Hey everybody, Pastor Kyle here. Would love to take a moment to really share a little bit of my story. It involves being a mess and darkness, a little bit of fear, but always covered by the grace of God. So when I was younger, I was born and raised into the Salvation Army Church. It's where I gained a lot of my passion for God's call on my life, for what ministry could be to care for others. When natural disasters would strike, we would be out on the canteen truck serving meals to people. I sat with people who were homeless and got to know their stories. And because of those interactions, because I met them as a person right where they are. I was able to grow deeper in my understanding of who God is. But the mess comes a few years later. When I turned about 16, I went through a dark period in my life, and I felt like I wanted to commit suicide. I had reached an end that I didn't see any light, any space, any way out. And a friend reached out and reminded me how loved I was. And because of that experience, I'm alive and I'm here today. The story continues on a few years later into, I would say, another rough patch where my grandpa, my pappy, my best friend, the person I loved the most, seemed to be taken away. He lost his battle with cancer when I turned 22. And when you're standing on an already shaky pillar, when you feel like the world is crumbling around you, it's hard to feel hope. But again, friends and family reached out. And because of their love and support, I made it through. It doesn't mean that I wasn't angry with God. I was furious. I was overwhelmed with grief. But that shaped me, and it made me the person that I am today. So you wonder how all of that feeds into why I'm a pastor today. People and connections and their stories come alive in ways that proclaim God's love and peace and makes us feel like we are a part of something bigger. And so a good friend, a pastor of mine, challenged me one day. He came up to me and he said, "Kyle, you're called. When are you going to seminary?" And I laughed and made the joke, if God sent us an email, it obviously went in your inbox and went into my spam. Surely God doesn't want this mess. But God's pretty relentless, patient, but relentless, and pursued after me again and again and again. A few years ago, I had two opportunities that really shaped and solidified this call to ministry. The first was I was able to go on a mission trip to Liberia, Africa, and to be a part of a clean water mission and to bring the hope of fresh water. But what ended up growing out of that was the stories and the connections of meeting the people and to come alive and to find a deeper sense of spirituality. Man, if that doesn't change you. Right about the same time, the author Bob Goff, my man, came to Springfield, Illinois, and he stood on the stage and he began to proclaim God's love for us, a love that does. And I felt my heartstrings being tugged again and again. And what Bob said next changed me forever. He said, "Sometimes you stand on the edge of life, of darkness, of fear, of anger. And you're afraid to take that step out, but you do. And even in that moment, if you fall right into the arms of Jesus." That's it. I couldn't run anymore. I had run for far too long. And so I stepped up and answered the call. For God had a plan for me that involves so many people. This is my story. This is my story to tell. One thing that I learned from one of my friends in Liberia is he was in an accident. And he said I should have died that day. But I stood up, for I have a story to tell. And that's my story that I will tell. That is something that I want you to be able to take away from this, if nothing else. Friends, we didn't die, so we stand up, for we have a story to tell. So I hope that the love that you're finding in this community, the love that you find of Christ moving in your life, I hope that that's a story that we can all tell. Thanks for letting me share with you, friends. This is a great opportunity to continue to grow as a community. I hope that if you have any questions or want to talk more, I would love to have a conversation with you. Thanks.
Did you notice a common thread through all three of our stories? There were people who took the time out to invest in us, to introduce us to the love of Jesus Christ so that we could then go out and share that love of Jesus Christ with others. Just like Jesus did for the woman at the well, and then for her to go and tell the entire village her story. That's what we mean by evangelism. Taking the time to invest in others just as someone has invested in us and share our story. That is the most powerful tool we have, is our story of what Jesus Christ has done in our lives to help introduce others to the love of Jesus Christ. That is what we're about. We as a faith community want to help as many people know the love of God as we possibly can, and our best tool is our stories. Now, I had to write mine down for a class and then recite it in front of every board I ever went in front of in order to become ordained. So I know my story and can tell it verbatim right off the cuff. But most people haven't taken the time to do that. And so we want to give you the chance to do that. So I want you to pause the video and get a pen and paper and take the time to write down your story. Now, here's a quick caveat. If you're watching this and you don't have a story yet, that you haven't been introduced to the love of Jesus Christ yet, you have to call me. You have to message me because I want to talk to you about it. If you're thinking, okay, I need to know a little bit more about this, or I want to see if this is for me, you have to give me a heads up because I want to chat with you about it, and maybe we can write your story together. But if you have had that moment, if you do know what Christ has done in your life, then I want you to pause the video, take some time, write down that story from whoever has been a pivotal person in your life to what Christ has done for you. Because in order to share it, you got to know your story. So pause the video and take some time to write your story. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Mike, I can't share my story. I'm not good at that. I'm not a pastor. I'm not an evangelist. That's intimidating. And I get it. It is tough. It is intimidating. I once heard a pastor talk about sharing our faith stories as being graduate level evangelism, like PhD evangelism. It can be intimidating. It can be difficult if you've never done it before. But here's the thing. We're already evangelists. I mean, for example, I have gone to Taqueria Z maybe once a week since I discovered it because it is delicious, and I went and I told the world, right? I went and saw Captain Marvel a couple weeks ago, and I told everybody because the movie was amazing. When we experience something amazing, we go and we tell everybody about it. That's evangelism. It's just evangelism for the wrong things. You see, the woman at the well has an encounter with Jesus, and she goes in and she tells an entire village. But we have an encounter with Jesus and we tell no one. We have been given the greatest gift, the love of Jesus Christ, and we hold it in. We don't tell anyone about it. We should be out shouting it from the mountaintops because we have the greatest gift that can go and change someone's life. Shame on us if we keep it to ourselves. And the most powerful gift we have to do that is our own story. The Samaritan woman changed the lives of an entire village because she shared her story with them. We can change lives by sharing our story. We just have to do it. Now, like I said, it's PhD level evangelism. I get it. Sharing our stories can be difficult and intimidating. So maybe we start somewhere before that. Maybe collegiate level evangelism is simply inviting somebody to church. I'll tell you, friends, here's the thing. There was a study done that, do you know how often someone invites another person to church? Just guess. I'll wait. Somebody throw out a number. Okay, I'll answer it for you. Somebody invites another person to church once every 36 years. What that means is that some people do it and some people never invite another person to come to a church function with them. We have to break that. We have to get beyond that. And I got to tell you, folks, this week is coming up to Easter. Easter is the easiest time to invite someone to come to church with you. Maybe Christmas, one of the two. Because people are looking to go to a worship gathering like ours. It's so simple. Somebody this week is going to say, hey, what are you doing this weekend? That's your open door. You say, well, it's Easter, so I'm going to our worship gathering for the connection. You know what? You should come with us. It is that simple. What are they going to do? Say no? Okay, well, fine. That happens. That's okay. But they might say yes, and it might change their life forever. So say that to them. Say, I'm going to our worship gathering this weekend. Come with me. Or maybe you're watching this early enough to invite them to come to our small group. Or we're going to have a party in the park in a couple weeks. Invite them to that. It cannot be easier than that to invite them to something that we do as the Connection Faith community and see what happens. Maybe that's collegiate level evangelism. Maybe high school evangelism is liking and sharing a post that we put up. I want to make this as easy as possible for you to share the story of the connection. And so when I put out a Facebook post that says, you know, Easter is this week, like it and share it on your own Facebook page. Or you see something that we post on our Instagram, you know, share that to your story or something. That has already worked. It has already worked. Someone in our faith community saw a post, liked it, shared it. A friend of hers who she hadn't talked to in years said, that looks like something I might be interested in, contacted her, and now she's part of our faith community. It can be that simple. It can be that simple. Elementary evangelism might just be doing some of the things that we're going to do this summer, like when we get a booth at the Goshen Market or handing out water bottles along the bike path or something where you don't have to do anything but sit there with other people. Maybe that's the base entry level. But do something. We have been given the most amazing gift of God's love. Shame on us if we're not sharing it, if we're keeping that to ourselves. We should be shouting it from the mountaintops. We should be sharing it with the entire village like the woman at the well did. Because it could change someone's life for eternity. All right, folks, that concludes our 6-week message series called This Is Us, about who we are striving to be as the Connection Faith community. But here's the thing. These 6 things can also serve as a litmus test for your own personal spiritual faith journey, how you're doing on your walk with Jesus Christ. Are you connecting with God through worship, coming to worship gatherings, but then also having your time to encounter the presence of God one-on-one? Are you coming to the groups and digging into discipleship with one another, but then also spending time to maybe just have some fun and build relationships? Are you connecting with the world around you, serving others and engaging with them and sharing your story? Now, I know that can be a lot and can feel kind of overwhelming. So here's the challenge that I want to leave you with at the end of this series. Pick one. Pick one of these things that God might be laying on your heart that you might need to improve and say, you know what, for the next month, that's the one I'm going to focus on. Maybe you aren't just getting enough quiet time and alone time with God during the week. Make that your focus. Maybe it's, I'm not reaching out and making relationships, so I'm just going to come to the fun things like the party in the park that we're going to have on May 5th, which you'll be getting more information about. Make that your focus for the next month. But pick one of them, make that the one that you're going to work on, and then when you get that figured out, move on to another one. But use this as a litmus test on how you're doing in your spiritual journey. Now, the one I recommend for this week is sharing your story. We have Easter coming up. I want to see you there, and I want to see you bring somebody with you because you took the time to just invest in them like Jesus did with the Samaritan woman to say, you know what? Why don't you come with me? You never know how you might change their life. All right, folks, I love this. I am so excited about what we have done already and who we are as the Connection Faith community, and what we will do and who we are going to be. I'm excited for the future because I can't wait to see how God is going to use you to change lives. So get out there, share your faith story, dig into discipleship to become more Christ-like. And then we'll see you on Easter, where we will talk about the reason that we get to do any of this in the first place. Thanks for coming along this journey with us, and I'll see you on Easter.